are joining today were at Maggie's first talk. And so you probably remember me introducing her then. The thing about Maggie, that one of the many things that I find so inspiring is that she's really made it her life purpose to help people live a heart-centered life. And she does that by integrating money and meaning. And so what that means is she helps them figure out, well, what really matters to you, and how do you use your resources to actually enact those values. And if you were at the last session, you might recall she kicked it off by saying, um, if you want to know what you value, investigate what you spend money on. And that was kind of like, woo, for me, and I imagine for many of you. And she talked a lot about money, and examining your emotional relationship to money as a spiritual practice, which I had never considered before. And to look at how do you balance, spiritualism, something greater than yourself, with materialism. So there was a lot of thought-provoking comments. And today she's going to be talking about what do you really care about for you, for your family, for the world, and how do you learn to make your money, leverage your money to work for the things that you actually care about. So with that, I will turn it over to Maggie Kulyk.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Dana, for that. I appreciate that. I'm noticing that we are about 10 participants. And so where last time we maybe were 20 or 25. So I want to, before we start, just say, please feel free to use the technology. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, but hopefully we'll just open it up pretty early in this conversation so that we can talk to one another. But in the meantime, if I say something and you want to make a comment, put it in the comment section or raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand thing under the participants column, so you can do that too. So last time we started the sort of framework I use when I'm working with folks around this individually is a framework that is a rhythm of looking back, looking in, and then looking forward. Very simple. So we spent some time last time looking back, and I asked you to think about your earliest money memories. We sent out some exercises that asked you to even look at your sort of the habits or the attitudes you might have picked up from the folks who raised you, whether they were a mother or father or maybe a grandparent or another influential adult in your life. We didn't get a chance to really go through that, but those things are designed to help you just sort of take money and your relationship with money and use it as a lens to evaluate your life to date. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to think about, okay, here's where we are, and try and surface what it is that most matters to us. It's what I refer to as the courageous vision. So I'm going to share my screen, and if you don't mind, Diane, giving me permission to do that when you get a second. She's working on it. You got it? No, still coming up, disabled. Okay, now we can do it. All right, so let me share my screen here, and I'll see if I can get my PowerPoint to go to slideshow. Are we seeing, tell me what you guys are seeing, because I don't have a good view of what I'm showing. Somebody pop on and let me know what you're seeing.
We're still seeing you. We're not
Oh,
seeing you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Now we have your screen.
Now let's go to slideshow. And go from current slide. There we go. So we left off around tracking money memories. And we had a little bit of a conversation about that. So now I want to talk a little bit about time and money, and the way they are extremely, in my mind, completely bound together. A joke, it is a joke, sort of, but it's also the truth. when a client comes in, a new client comes in, and we start to think about financial planning, the most important information is completely unavailable to us. And that is, of course, how long are you going to live? If we knew that, if you knew that from a financial planning perspective, the math would be actually very, I would say it would be dramatically simplified than the process we have to go through. That's when you talk about money and you talk about time, and we live in a culture where we're trying to accumulate money. I mean, that's the normal pattern. You're trying to accumulate enough money so that at some point you're not having to work. Work becomes optional, and you have enough stored up in your silo of money that it's going to last you for the rest of your life. Most people on the verge of retirement, of course, are very concerned. The number one thing is, I don't want to run out of money. But it also, I would argue, a focus on time also relates to how we spend it, and in thinking about our limitations on time. In point of fact, you can, most of us can figure out some way to get more money, but you cannot figure out any way. There is no way that I'm aware of to get more time on the planet. So this next section and this sort of exercise is designed to focus our minds on the limitations of our time and help us think about how we want to be spending it and how we want to be aligning our money to support that. So it is, in essence, this is again part of this language of spiritual practice, a focus on mortality as a spiritual practice has been a very common spiritual practice, in at least the two places I'm very aware of it is both in Buddhism and in Christianity. That is to say, there were monks who used to like sit in caves and stare at skulls, right? And the idea of which is to really get clear about your own mortality. I'm using this more to help people get clear about what matters to them. So, so the exercise we sent out asked you to consider sort of three different questions, and they're questions that come straight from George Kinder, who's often regarded as the quote unquote father of financial life planning. He wrote a book that had a strong influence on me really very early in my career called The 7 Stages of Money Maturity. And he asked clients to consider these questions. If you have 5 to 10 years to live and you will die suddenly, what specific things would you change about your life today? If you knew that, if you actually knew that. It's a thought experiment, of course. We're not going to have a lot of time to allow you to talk to one another about this, but it's the 5 to 10 year piece, that question, it seems to me, that time frame allows you to yet make change that's impactful. And, in point of fact, I particularly like this question because it's real. I mean, that is to say, we don't know when we're going to die. 5 to 10 years, that question still allows us to think, if that were really the case, if I'm thinking for myself, if I was going to be gone by 63, what would I change today? The next level question is, you have only 1 year. And the way I have asked people to think about the 1 year time frame is to think about what you would want your ideal day to look like. What would your morning be like? How would you rise? How would you spend your time in the morning? What would you do in the afternoon? How would you spend your evening? Where would you be? Who would you be with? How would you live out that year? And I'm asking you to suspend disbelief in this question too and say, I'm not thinking I'm lying in a hospital bed in my living room. I'm thinking I'm actually able to spend time with people I love and do the things I care most about on a daily basis. And then the last question is, the thought experiment is you're going to die before sundown today. And the question is, what did you not do? And perhaps even more specifically, who did you not become that you perhaps wish you had? So I would urge you, if you haven't yet thought through these questions, to try it. My experience when I've done this in live workshops is that it usually evokes some pretty strong emotions in people if they can allow themselves to get to the place of pondering these things. And I would urge you, if you do the exercise, to pay attention to what comes up. Pay attention to, even if it seems like, you know, gosh, I never got to go to wherever, or maybe it's, I actually wouldn't change a thing. But I think it's important to sit with it and write it down, because the good news is you're not dead yet. And so there's still time to make change. And if you do get a very clear sense of, wow, I really do want to, there is something that's really on my heart that's come up for me. And I really do think that I have, you know, that there's something I need to be living out that I'm not living out. I refer to that visualization as the courageous vision. And I call it the courageous vision because I think that it takes an enormous amount of courage to risk that hope of change. It takes courage to risk a longing of the heart. I think we live in a world that constantly wants to reduce our expectations for ourselves, for our communities, for our nation. We live in a world that wants to keep us contained, and it is in some sense safer to stay contained, because the minute you risk a vision and the minute you risk allowing a longing to come into your life, you risk the disappointment that you can't actualize it. So that's why I say I think it takes a lot of courage to do that. I'm feeling like I want to stop sharing and see people, because I've just said some fairly serious things, and I feel a little vulnerable out here all by myself talking this way. I don't want to just talk into the void. So I want to pause for just a second and see if I can ask any of you to simply react to any of the questions I just raised. Before I go on, I'm going to go on into sort of spending and saving. I'm going to do all that. But before I go further, I just want to hear how this is hitting you on, in the ears of your heart. If any of you make so bold as to share with me.
This is Gertrude Sachikar. So can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the first things that came to mind, especially that very last question, like you're going to die by sundown, what have you not become? And when I read it in the pre-work, I was, it got me a little bit anxious, right? Because I think I read it like at 4, so sundown was very close. And I was immediately thinking about all these things that I didn't do. But then when I read it now, when you presented it, I kind of like flipped it and thought, well, I haven't become a horrible person, and I don't think I will be one by sundown. So, so that could also be another perspective for that question, right? Because we could have come a horrible person or a victim or a very angry kind of human being or unkind, ungenerous, etc. So, so I think that's at least that made me feel somewhat relief.
Yes. That's very helpful, actually. That's a really interesting perspective on it. I didn't become a complete idiot. Well, maybe a partial idiot, but not a complete. Right, right. Thank you for that.
So,
Others?
yeah, I can share. You know, it was interesting. Oddly enough, this might sound horrible, but when I thought about 5 to 10 years, I'm going to die suddenly, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a relief because I don't have to, I'm good for 10 years. Like, it's my fear of what if I live to 100 and how much money am I going to have? And is it going to be enough? It's like, oh, 10 years? Awesome. I got
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what to do with that.
Well, it's an interesting, I mean, there you go. There, I mean, that's just exactly that linkage, the time and money linkage that we experience in our culture. That I should say I experience it all the time because I work with a lot of people approaching retirement or in retirement, and that's the number one thing, you know. I do joke with clients, and actually, it's not really a joke. Every year when we review somebody's plan, the first things I go over are their life expectancy. Okay, we have you set to X. Does this still feel realistic to you? Does it feel too long? Does it feel too short? Because, you don't, on the one hand, you don't want to live your life like you're worried you're going to be 100, right? you know, it feels like, by the time you're 100, you're not going to be doing likely the things that you're doing today, even if you make it that long. So it's really, that tension is real, very real. And it has big influences on what one does in the near term. So yeah, I get it, the relief. Sometimes in my own financial plan, I'm just like 68, retired today. But of course I don't do that. Others, please. Anyone else? Sharing. No sharing.
So this is Meg. I haven't been thinking about this particular issue for myself, but I have an 80-year-old mother, and we're trying to consider paths for her, and so this topic has actually come up a lot right now, thinking about how to get her set up and comfortable and be able to focus her life. She's actually healthy right in the moment, and I want her to live as full and beautiful a life as she wants to live while she's here with us, that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of thinking, but as I've done that with her, I've realized I've never considered that for myself. And so there's all kinds of missing components. But the other observation I thought I would share, and I don't know if anyone else has been feeling this way, but with the confluence of issues that are going on in our world today, I find that I just want to shed myself of everything, all of the material confines that exist in my world. I just don't want it anymore. Like it doesn't matter. It's not meaningful. It's and it's weighing me down. Like that's how and there's others that don't have, and I could do more to help those that don't have, and you know, like all of that kind of stuff going on. Feel like we're in such a particularly complex time around those kinds of things that's come up a lot for me. Like, you know, how can I just simplify it all? You know, simplify my life, and maybe in that process give back to others. You know, I don't know. That's
Yeah. That is a great segue, actually, Meg, to the next part I want to share with you today, which is once you have a courageous vision, or even if that courageous vision is something like this, something as straightforward as I want to focus my life. I want to get rid of everything that just like currently just feels like it just doesn't have any meaning to me, and I want to live differently. How do you begin to break that down and think about that sort of in the ways and in my case today, we're thematizing in the ways that you interact with money. So let me go back to sharing again. And because sometimes these things are nice to see. These pictures can be helpful. Okay. So slideshow and play from Chrome. Okay, so my thought is the first thing you do is identify those for whom you bring your gifts into the world. That's, to me, that's a key piece. Like, who am I here to serve? It's sort of like soul niche marketing. In the sense of like, I'm not here to serve everybody. I'm not here to do everything. I'm here to do something for a tribe, the language of tribe, for a set of people or a community. And I think that I personally think that helps to kind of give you some gracious boundaries about, you know, the limitations of your time and the limitations of your energy and the limitations of, you know, the energy in your life that we call money. That's step one, I would argue. Step two is you trust yourself. I mean, look, this is a organization of women business owners and entrepreneurs, and you know, surely you have heard this a million times from your executive coaches. It's true. You know, trusting the longing of your soul, trusting yourself, paying attention. This is where it gets a little woo-woo, perhaps for some of you, but I think this stuff matters. I pay a lot of attention to my dreams. Currently, not as much as I think I should. I'm becoming aware that I'm dreaming a ton and not writing them down, but sometimes your dreams can tell you a lot. Things that come up, synchronicities in your life. You know, I'm sure you've had the experience where somebody says something to you and then somebody else said something similar, and then you see a book about it and you start to think, wow, the universe is perhaps trying to tell me something. And then just beginning to make it happen in one form or another, which can be as simple in my mind as writing it down, writing down your vision. But we're going to talk about also incarnating it in assessing the 4 key money activities in our lives. And the first is earning. So I think everybody on the call is in earning mode. I don't think anybody on the call has made earning money optional. So I'm going to assume that we're all working in some way. We're either running our own businesses or we're working for someone else who's running the business, but we're involved in that. And I think you do have to ask yourself, you know, how do you earn your money? Does your work serve this vision? And is the work valued by the people who you feel called to serve? So that last question relates to and comes from, I think I mentioned early on that I would do this workshop, and I was doing this workshop for people who were about to enter the ministry in the Christian tradition. They were about to enter for the most part, liberal Protestant denominations. So I was talking to people who were about to be ordained Methodist pastors or Presbyterian pastors, or possibly Episcopal priests or UCC pastors. And for those of you who are not involved in any Christian denomination, let me just say that many of these students were graduating with an enormous amount of debt and about to enter a profession that was going to pay them very little into institutions that are really struggling to survive. And my pointed question to them, which might resonate with some of you, is the place you are working and the work you are doing actually valued by your tribe, the people you think you're serving? Are you being paid properly for that work? And properly can have a wide range of numbers. It's not exactly about a number. It's about, you know, are you being valued, and do you feel valued? And then giving, Meg, you mentioned this, you know, what courageous vision is your giving supporting? Do you know? Are you giving sort of reactively because somebody asked you? Or are you giving with a vision in mind of the way you want the world to be? Are the people you are giving to, is it supporting your particular vision? I mean, in philanthropy, some of you may be very active, perhaps you're not, I don't know, but a focused philanthropy can be a very powerful philanthropy. A strategic philanthropy can be a very powerful philanthropy. So I think a lot of us give sort of reactively and not with our own sort of mission in mind, because we're getting pulled into somebody else's visions and somebody else's mission. And I just want to support, I think giving is a very important part of a healthy relationship with money. I also think that it shouldn't just be mindless giving to sort of quell, stopping somebody from bothering you anymore or quelling some sense of guilt. So looking at whether or not your giving is actually in alignment with your own vision, and noticing whether how the giving makes you feel. So if it's not inspiring joy, you need to stop. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but if whatever you're giving to is not giving you joy, then stop until you find something to give to that gives you joy. It makes you feel like you're making a difference in the world in a very empowered way and not simply reacting to someone else's perceived claim on you. And we can talk a lot about different forms of that. I'm very involved with an organization called the Women Donors Network. And so have been for about 10 years, but super involved for about the last 5 or 6. And so I have a lot of things to say about philanthropy and the importance of it, and also the importance of really understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. And of course, one of the most important things and most powerful things in terms of making change, I mean, if you're inclined at all to be a financial activist, how you spend your money and what's underneath, what's going on in the companies you're supporting, I think is extremely important. So do your purchases support your courageous vision? Are you spending consciously? Are you bringing things into your home that matter to you? Or are you, I mean, I don't know if some of you perhaps either have children now or have had children in your life in the past. My children are now all out of the house, but there was a period from about their age, maybe 2 to like 13 or something, where it just felt like we were constantly sweeping out tiny little plastic items. Like it seemed like everywhere they went, they would acquire small plastic items. You'd go to a store or Starbucks and they give them little plastic something or others. I mean, in their drinks. I mean, it was just crazy. It was like the place was growing small plastic items. How do you stop that stuff from coming into your home, or whatever it is your particular orientation is, or just how do you get serious about simplifying? do you make conscious decisions when you spend? How do you do that? What is the methodology by which you might do it? One of the things we don't have, one of the things technology hasn't helped us with thus far, I don't think, is, and could be leveraged. I've had some ideas about this, but I haven't seen really good apps for this. Really helping us understand when we're buying something, what, for example, the supply chain is. Who is making it? Are they being paid a fair wage? Is it prison labor? Is it slave labor? You know, what energy is this thing carrying that I'm about to spend money on? And that information is actually exceedingly hard to get. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute around investing, but you would think it would be much more surface available. It is not. It's actually very opaque, and I do not think that that's an accident. And then, of course, finally, are you truly satisfied, you know, by your purchase? In other words, did you buy something like my Apple? Last time we were together, I talked about the Apple iPhone. You know, it's like I was buying Apple iPhones for my kids because I wanted them to be creative geniuses instead of, okay, you know. So was I satisfied? Turned out none of my kids were creative geniuses. I just have to say that, but they're all wonderful and I'm glad they have iPhones. But the point is, you know, is there a linkage between what you bought and what you got and are still getting? I mean, in this regard, this is where the, you know, the Condi system of like looking at all of the items in your life and seeing if they inspire joy, and if they don't, get them the hell out of the house. I think that there's a lot of magic to that. I think it's really important. And finally, storing, i.e. saving or investing. Money is what money does. What is your money up to when you're not looking? And does it support your courageous vision? So where you are banking, for example, what else is your bank doing? Who else is your bank supporting? Are you okay with that? You may be fine with it. You may feel like what your bank is otherwise lending to are things that you think are great and support your own vision of what you want the world to be for yourself, for your family, for others. Or you may find that they're doing things that you find absolutely abhorrent and you do not wish to support that. Now, we all know that I think there's almost nothing that is more of a pain in the ass these days than changing banks. If any of you have done it, especially if you're all wired in with all of your automatic payments, right, and all of your bill pays, and you got all that in there, and you're just like, I would rather have root canal without anesthesia than have to go through changing my bank, right? I get it. And then you also have to, you would ask appropriately the question, well, okay, let's imagine I don't want to, you know, leave my money with XYZ bank because I find some of what else they're lending to really abhorrent, or their practices abhorrent. Where else do I go? Well, you know, there are banks, there are community banks, there are credit unions that are much, much more connected to your local community, and that are supporting perhaps businesses in your local community, or businesses that get less support from the large banks, they get less time from the large banks, or they're building homes in your local community and actually keeping the mortgages. There really are banks that do that. I didn't realize it, but they really are. There are still banks that actually make mortgages and still keep them and don't just securitize them. And so have a kind of dog in the race of whether or not those homeowners actually pay back that mortgage and are thriving. So there are banking channels, for example. And then, of course, investing, which is, you know, a big part of my day job. And I can and will go on and on about this, but I'll try and keep it brief, and then perhaps we can have more of a conversation, but are there ways to do less harm and invest in the public markets, in companies that are publicly traded? And the answer to that is absolutely. There absolutely are ways to do less harm. And I will go further and say there are ways to do less harm and profit. And in the long term, I would argue profit more than if you ignore certain criteria. So there are the sort of larger umbrella of this type of investing, sort of, meta version of this is environmental, social, and governance screens on investments, either funds or individual companies. And there is a lot of information available now on a company's practices in relationship to things like, their carbon footprint, their use of plastics, their water impact. I mean, and many, many more metrics about how the company is impacting the natural world and the environment, as well as how the company is participating in or not opportunities for a cleaner, greener kind of environment. So there are metrics that measure how well a company, how much damage a company is doing, but there are also measures of how well the company is doing and what technologies they're bringing on to take advantage of what will likely be, we hope, a greener economy in the future. That's the E in very broad terms. The S is social metric, which is how do they treat their employees? If they're unionized, what is their union relationship? How do they treat their other stakeholders? What does their supply chain look like? This is where the supply chain questions come in. And, it shouldn't surprise you that companies that develop their human capital, have stronger supply chains, have fairer and more just supply chains, actually do better in the long run. There is clear evidence that those companies with higher measurements in those metrics perform better in the longer term. They add more value to the holder of their stock. And the last is governance. And governance as a criteria has actually been around in very uncontroversial way for a long time, because how well a board performs, how objective the board is relative to the CEO, how well governed is the company. The better governed companies, again, they do better over time in terms of valuations, and there are metrics for that. We also at Chicory care a whole lot about diversity. We think diversity in the longer term, and there's again some evidence, not just in terms of gender diversity, but cultural diversity, racial diversity, makes a board stronger. And so when we vote proxies on behalf of our clients, one of the things we look very strongly at is diverse boards. We have a policy right now that if a board does not have 3 women on the board, we vote against all of the board. Period. That's our story. We're sticking to it, and we're going to continue to do it. And we work with other nonprofits, other registered investment advisors to coordinate those votes. We're trying to send a message that a single woman on the board does not a diverse board make. The token woman, add one white woman stir is not going to get it. So again, this is the broad meta kind of screen. And then one might get more detailed and exclude whole segments of a sector, for example. I've got clients who do not wish to have anything to do with fossil fuels. Okay. I've got clients who certainly want to make sure that nothing in our portfolio relates to mass criminalization. We've got screens that relate to tobacco, for example, which has been around. Those are so-called socially responsible screens. They can vary by client. We have a set model that excludes all of those things that I mentioned, but notably does not exclude alcohol. Okay, so some people might want an alcohol exclusion. That's a socially responsible exclusion, for example. So all of this is possible. And I would argue for those of you who have invested assets in the stock market, you know, and you maybe hold a very strong opinion, or you have a very strong vision, perhaps that you want to enact, you want to make sure it's happening in the world, you really should look very deeply at what is actually happening in your investments. Not just because it's not in alignment with your vision, but perhaps because, to be frank, you might be on the wrong side of history, and therefore the wrong side of where the market's going as well in the longer term. So I'm going to stop now on that note and open it up for some conversation. And let me stop sharing and see you all. So I just said a whole lot of stuff. I'm going to give you a chance to say some stuff or ask some questions. We've got some time. Comments? Questions? Don't be shy.
I will chime in. Thank you so much for this. It's so helpful. What's a good way to go about vetting companies? So when you talk about backgrounding, you know, I won't go to Chick-fil-A. I won't go to Home Depot. I won't deal with Domino's Pizza because I know that they're completely contrary to what I believe in. I've done that much homework, but I'm interested in knowing what's a good way to sort of vet different
What are
companies.
some resources?
Yes.
Yeah. So one really good resource is a nonprofit called As You Sow, SOW. Okay.
Right.
And they are, we partner with them quite a bit. The reason I would say, so As You Sow is sort of in the camp of, okay, there are companies doing bad things. How do we work with those companies to help them do better things? So for some people, As You Sow is a little too in the mainstream. You know, they're not sort of as activist as some, but it's a good place to start for a clear sense of issues they're working on with very, very large companies. And they've got lots of accessible tools, including a really cool tool where if you're wanting to see, say you own a mutual fund in a brokerage account or in your 401k, and you want to know what's going on and how that mutual fund is rated in various metrics, they've got a very nice tool where you just put in the symbol and it pops up and it tells you all sorts of things about that fund. Now, they don't have that at the individual stock level, but they have it at the fund level. And they chose to go with funds because the facts are most investors are invested in funds. They're not invested in individual stocks. And, you know, they're like, how the hell do you know what's going on inside the fund? And how do you choose better funds? This tool is actually extremely helpful. So if you go to their website, you'll see a little pin that says invest your values. So As You Sow is one. Another one, a little edgier one, is a nonprofit called Corporate Accountability. And corporate accountability works on specific issues. And they've been around. They were the original, if some of you are old enough to remember the Nestle boycott back in the day, when Nestle was selling powdered formula to women in developing nations and having them get off breastfeeding, and then they were using terrible water to mix the formula, and babies were dying hand over fist, God help us. And so it was corporate, the originators of corporate accountability were the people who started, were the women, by the way, who started that boycott. That organization still exists.
And then companies with 3 women or more on the board.
So, right. So, yeah, there are very few companies. It's not like if we said, let's only invest in companies with 3 women on the board, we have an extremely simple portfolio, let me just say, and perhaps a little concentrated, right? So, but again, if you own individual companies, if you own them, every year you have the opportunity to vote your proxy. And if you work with an advisory firm like ours, like some advisory firms like us have the client vote the proxies. Our default is for us to vote the proxies, which our clients like because they know that we actually do it and really give a damn, right? And what happens with individual investors sometimes is they just get busy, or they look at it and they don't know how to interpret it, etc. But if you're working with an advisor, you should ask that advisor, are you, and you own individual stocks, are you voting those proxies, or who is voting those proxies? Am I supposed to be voting those proxies? And this is where, to guide you in a proxy vote, As You Sow puts out a proxy guide every single year. You can sign up and get it free, and it will give you a list of companies that you may or may not own, but you can see if you own any of them, what the issues they're working on, and how they would recommend you vote. So
Thank you.
that's an excellent. Those are a couple of things for starters.
Great.
Other questions? That was a great question. And I would just say, the other thing to do is, if you've got a particular issue area that you're concerned about, Google it. You will find that, for example, with the advent of, a lot of us are much more sort of attuned now with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and just sort of like this coming into our consciousness, going, wow, like, am I invested in anything that is getting support from prison labor? What I mentioned earlier. We use, at Chicory, we use a database through MSCI, Morgan Stanley something International. I can't ever remember what the C stands for, but it's a huge database. And they have an ESG-centric series of metrics. And they have a whole bunch of metrics around slave labor, which is typically the purview of the so-called developing world. They didn't have a way for us to parse specifically prison labor. And we went back to them and said, why don't you have this? And they said, well, we can have it for 20 grand more. We're already paying them 50 for 20 grand more. And we were like, come on, man. Like, well, if we know there's a demand for it, they said. So we start calling around to other registered investment advisory firms. We're in a consortium of investors around social justice. And we're trying to pressure MSCI to just bring this on as part of their package because we need it. But, that's an example of, like, you get focused on something and you organize to make change, but we will have, I guarantee you, by the end of the year, MSCI will be not only giving this to us for free, they'll be telling everybody they did. It's all about bringing pressure, right? It's all about shining a spotlight on things. And nothing is a bigger spotlight in our culture than money. It's an enormous tool for social change. And it's an enormous tool for empowerment. And obviously you can tell how animated I get around this. I mean, I do think of myself as kind of financial activist, and I work with people who also think of themselves in that way. Not everybody does, and that's cool. We're not for everybody, but there are people out there who want this and just don't know how to get it on their own, on the investment side. On the spending side, as I joke, we could live in your wallet, but it would be $20,000 extra. So we can't control what you spend on, but we can encourage and provide information and help you think about it. Because it's not strictly about how much, it's the what of it. What is it giving you? Yes, please.
I have another question.
Sure.
In terms of the work that you do you consult as well as advise financially? So what's the bogey for someone to become your client? What's the dollar amount? And then do you also sort of consult on a ad hoc basis, basically by the hour or whatever? How does that work?
Yeah, so we do financial planning. We're fee only, so we do financial planning for a fee. We do asset management for a fee.
Okay.
We do strictly financial planning for a fee without managing assets, but we won't manage assets without doing financial planning. So We have a financial planning process we put people through that's just a standalone process that doesn't involve taking over their assets and managing them. And that's $3,500. Bottom line. And then if we're managing assets, you know, there are clients who come in and they're like, I want you to do both. I'll move my money now. Okay, we're doing the financial planning process, but we're not charging them over top for the financial planning fee.
And you do
so
organizations as well?
You mean nonprofits, for example, or
yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And that, of course, obviously is just it's technically only asset management, but my experience with working with nonprofits is they actually need planning too, in a way. They need sort of like a modified version of that in terms of, you know, cash flow planning and also just investment, you know, a clear philosophy of investment, etc. So yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. Other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Mine's more of a comment than a question. And first, a thank you for all of the great insights on both this call and the last one. It's been really interesting. I was thinking a little bit about what Meg was talking about, and my kind of emotional ties to this topic are that my mom died unexpectedly at the age of 49, and I have a month that will turn me 49, so it's top of mind. And she had a packed suitcase at the foot of her bed with her golf clubs and plane tickets in her purse to take a splurge trip to Florida. So I've had this kind of, and I was in my early 20s, so it's been a long time. But I had this kind of like yin and yang thing going on all the time about like I should just spend and do things because she didn't get that last chance, and like you could die at any moment. And you know, back to kind of what you were saying about what would you do if you had 6 months or 6 years or 10 years. But then, you know, I obviously hope to live a much longer life, and so I restrict myself and not a big egregious spender by any stretch, and probably don't treat myself nearly as much as I should, which my husband even reminds me of. So again, it was more of a comment, but I just, you know, I think a lot of people probably struggle with whatever personal history they have that also have some connection to finances and money management and spending and saving and all of that. And so it's just been really top of mind because of the two conversations we've all had now and the birthday that's coming up.
Yeah, no, that's real. Thank you for sharing that. I think that finding that balance, you know, on a day by day, month by month, really year by year piece. I mean, I think is really important. I, as someone who is a purveyor of advice to human beings about their life and their money, the thing that it weighs heavy on me to think that I might inadvertently create enough tension in someone's life that they fail to do the things that their hearts desire, and then they die before they get to do them. And this is, I mean, I talk to my clients about this because I have had people die in their 40s. I lost my brother very tragically, you know, just after he retired in his later 50s. And so, you know, the reality that you can die and not do the things that really matter to you that is the true story. And, you know, and the tension of that is the other side of that you're pointing to, and that Dana mentioned too, is, you know, you want to create some balance so that you don't inadvertently impoverish, you know, your older Melanie. Right. You don't want to create a poor Melanie either. And that's this person in our future that we can barely even, for most of us, can barely even imagine, you know. So I think there are ways to like trade that off consciously, but I think you have to face it, which is what you're doing, and you have to be conscious of it. And then, you know, you can quantify these things. I mean, this is the beauty of financial planning. It's not perfect. You know, we're running computer models. There are things that can I mean, for example, like COVID-19 is a scenario. Okay, it wasn't in our plan like last year, right? It's not going to be right. But you can get a little closer than just, oh, I shouldn't spend, or oh, I should spend it. You know, you can get a little bit, you know, that process can help illuminate what's possible with a reasonable probability. And that's the strength of a process like that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I would, you know, if there's really something you really, really want to do, you know, I'm all for people doing it. You should do it. Of course, you can't fly, so it's not going to be, I don't know where you live, but it's, unless you're living in Florida, of course, it's not Florida, you know, but, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have just a few more minutes left. Other questions, comments? Last call. Well, I'll just stop. I know Meg has some concluding comments, but I just want to thank you all very much for your attention and your time. It's been a pleasure being with you. I do really feel like this is what I was put on the planet to do. I have no idea why. It wasn't what I thought I would do when I was 10 or 15 or 20 even, but that's the way that works. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk to folks like yourself. So thank you very much. So I'll let it to y'all to take it out.
Yeah, Maggie, thank you so much. We couldn't be more appreciative of you spending time. I think I speak on behalf of others. At least I'll speak on behalf of myself. The questions you've asked us have been wildly profound, and I think really pushes us to delve deep around the notion around money, and I think that's really important. I loved one of the comments you made about money is an enormous tool for social change and empowerment, and I think when you can frame it up like that, it gets very exciting about how to imagine or think about it to some degree. And some of that empowerment is empowering ourselves. So it's not just about saving the world, although that's great too, but you know, how are we empowering ourselves, you know? And so there's something really fascinating. I really appreciated those comments. It's really made me think. I was daunted when those questions came out because I looked at them a couple days ago and I was like, I just don't even have an answer. Like that's more than my brain can take in. But anyway, you know, Quorum ladies, the thing that we focus on is action. So I would really like to challenge all of us to take those questions back home, think about them, and spend a little time on it, because they're amazingly profound, and I do think can help shape our futures, and we owe it to ourselves, I think, you know. So thank you, Maggie, for inspiring us in that way. So that's the first action for today. Second is I have a couple comments about upcoming sessions. I just wanted everyone to mark on their calendars. July 21st, we have Janet Thomas, who is a speaker who came to How a couple of years ago and spoke to us, who's a leading woman in financial services in the UK, but also very focused on technology and done a lot of work on equality in the UK market. I think you will really enjoy her. So please mark your calendar for that. We would love to have you join. She's just fantastic. So that's a not to miss. August 4th, we have a session with Marcia Henderson, who is the former Associate Commissioner of Women's Health at the FDA. Very passionate speaker, very focused on mentoring and leadership, and I think you will really enjoy a lot that she has to say about her thoughts as she's moving on into a sort of a new phase of her career. So I wanted to mention her. And then in September, we have a woman who is coming to speak to us, Claude Silver, who's going to talk to us about what it means to be a Chief Heart Officer, which is almost a title she's really sort of created and started to proliferate, which is just absolutely fascinating in my mind. So we're super excited about having her in September. So those are just little tidbits. Please pay attention to those fabulous emails of Diane's, because she's going to remind you about all these dates and make sure you put it on your calendar so you can join us. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well, because if you do that, you'll get the updates on when the events are happening to remind you again. And last little comment is, if you're not already a digital member for Quorum, everything that we're doing these days is digital because that's the world we live in. And so we would be delighted to have you join us. Diane will be sending information around about that, so please keep that in mind. And Maggie, thank you. A huge, big thank you, very profound. It's such an honor to have you with us, and we really appreciate you taking time to share your world, your thoughts, your focus, what you care about with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Have a wonderful
everybody.